Hey folks, in this video I'm going to show you how to make this responsive bento grid using grid template areas. Now to start, in our HTML we have a div with a class of grid and it contains 5 child divs. All the child divs have the class block for the shared UI styles, and then each block also has a unique class starting with block 1 and going down to block 5. Now in our styles, I already added some global styles, again just for some UI styles. And we're mainly going to be focusing on adding some grid layout styles to turn what we have into that bento grid. So at the moment, we have the grid container with a gap of 24 pixels to add space between the children. And this layout with just one column, it looks fine for mobile, but as we increase the viewport width, I would like to change the template to be 2 columns. So to do this, for our grid, I'm going to add a media query, and in it I'm going to target width greater than or equal to 40 rems, which is 640 pixels. And in here, let's create our grid template. I'm going to create 2 columns of equal width. And we also do need to explicitly create rows, otherwise the rows are going to be sized at auto, and some of them are going to collapse because they don't have enough text content to create more visible height in the rows. So I'm going to duplicate the grid template columns, rename it to grid template rows, and I'm going to set 4 rows of 1FR. Now let's make this more bento-like by using grid areas. First, we want to give each child div a grid area name. So I'm going to target the block 1 class and give it a grid area name of HTML. Then let's duplicate this 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and I'm going to rename them to block 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we also want to give the other ones names to CSS, JS, we'll say VS for VS Code, and then CC for Coder Dark. Okay, so because we added grid area to the grid children, and we have not yet added grid template areas, by default things are going to get stacked and not look great. So we need to go back to our grid parent, and we want to create grid template areas. And we want to assign each cell in our grid template to a grid child item. So starting with quotes, we're going to assign the cells in the first row. So again, we have 2 columns per row. So I'm going to make the first column HTML and the second column CSS. Then I'm going to just press enter and make the second row. And I'm going to set this to JS and then again CSS to make that CSS block a little bit taller. Then the third row is going to be JS and VS, and the fourth row is going to be CC for both columns. So now when we save, we have our bento grid. And one thing that you can do to make your grid template areas a little more readable is you can add spaces so that the columns line up. And you don't have to do it, it works fine either way, but I think this makes it just a little bit more readable. Now, this looks pretty good. However, if we go back to mobile, you can see that everything is stacked and looking weird again. So we actually do need to go back to our default mobile styles and create grid template areas here as well. So in the mobile styles, we're going to have just 1 column per row. So we'll say HTML, and maybe I'll just put this all in one line, CSS, JS, VS, CC. There we go. And for our mobile styles, we don't have to explicitly set a grid template row size. The auto size is fine for this because we just have 1 column per row. So each row is just going to be sized according to the content. Also, grid defaults to 1 column, so we don't have to explicitly set grid template columns for mobile either. So now we have mobile, tablet, and I also want to add some different desktop styles. So let's change the grid template for our desktop widths. So I'm actually going to duplicate our tablet media query, and we're going to change the breakpoint for desktop. I'm going to make this 50 rems, which is 800 pixels. So in our desktop styles, I'm going to change the number of columns to 4. And we can actually delete the grid template rows because this is just going to take the rows from tablet and they both will have 4 rows. So now let's adjust the grid template areas for desktop. So in the first row, I'm going to keep the first 2 columns as is, and I'm going to add JS at the end to add the JavaScript block there. Then on the second row, I'm going to set this to HTML, CSS, JS. And then the third row, I'm going to say HTML again, CSS, and then I'm going to say VS. And then the fourth row, I'll make it HTML again, because we're making that taking up all the rows. And then we'll say CC, and CC. There we go. So now when we save, we have our desktop bento grid, and it's matching the areas that we had set in our styles. And one last tip that you can do with the grid areas is that if you want an empty cell, you can designate that with a dot. So if I make the first HTML a dot, and I also make the last CC a dot, then you can see that the dots leave an empty space in those parts of the grid template. So here's our desktop, tablet, and mobile grid. And that's how we can make a responsive bento grid. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor and like the video and leave a comment down below just to help with the YouTube algorithm. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.